The shifts and changes within our culture, certainly since 9/11 and its aftermath, and how we as the church are trying to navigate and come to terms with those changes. Last week we talked about two really major shifts that affect how we think about ourselves and how we act as church. And the first one is recognizing that we are now living in a digital age. And because of that, a sense of community and sense of groupings has become much more diversified. And we need to deal with that reality in the church, because if you look at what we have done in the church historically, we have had an ideal of what it is to be the ideal Christian, and have tried to form people into that, almost using cookie cutters at times, to get people to conform. And that is exactly the opposite direction, conformity, as to what is emerging within our culture as a value of diversity. The other piece is that we are experiencing a shift from a consumer culture to a culture of participation, moving from a culture where things go one way from the producer to the person who receives it, to a culture where people want to be engaged in transformative ways. And again, that challenges the way we have done church. We are so used to staff-driven and pastor-driven programs that we need to think in new ways to bring people into participation in more vital and life-giving ways. You would think we wouldn't have a problem with this in the United Church of Christ, because really this defines who we are. We are a denomination that has mixed together various strands that you would never think would rub shoulders together. Midwestern Germans out of a piety tradition, with urbane cosmopolitan Congregationalists from New England. I mean, really, we are about diversity. And we have always valued how our lay people are involved at every level of decision-making within our churches. So why are we declining like everyone else? And it's just because there are other aspects going on in our culture. If you look at the way the wider culture, especially the unchurched, those who do not go to church at all, look at how we are as church, they see us as largely irrelevant. They do not understand it. In fact, there was a recent poll done of those people who do not go to church, asking them if they could identify even one thing that they know that the church has done to make a difference in our society or in our culture. Half of them could not do it. We are largely invisible to those who are outside of church. And then when you look at how the media portrays us, well, again, you can see how those who kind of are aware of church begin to look at us with some antipathy. And there are four basic ways in which folks who have antipathy look at us that we have to deal with. And the first one is that we are seen largely as a community of hypocrites. Just browse through news stories that make the headlines about the church, and you see everything from pedophile priests to embezzling evangelists and back again. The stories are horrific about scandal, and the message that is being played out in our culture and wide is these people say one thing, but they live a totally different reality. And the emerging culture around us, those who are really yearning for spiritual understanding, they are seeking a sense of authenticity, of people who walk the talk. And to see a church that lives in ways that are hypocritical is off-putting for them. And yet that's really not who we are. Come into the office and shadow Thelma or I for just one day, and you will see the kinds of things that we get involved in. We help families who are scared to death that they have to make a choice between going hungry and paying their utility bills, hook up with the food pantry. We help people who are in their senior years on a very limited income, trying to make ends meet so they can pay their co-pays to get health care. And we help them find people to navigate them through the system in ways that are humane. We do these things day in and day out, but they don't make the press. They don't get out there in terms of this is what this kind of community does for its wider community. And whose fault is that? We've allowed other people to set the narrative. There's another way in which we are perceived as being sort of out of step. And if you ask people who do know something about the church, what the church is really all about, they will tell you it's all about sin. And that is largely true. I mean, for over 1,000 years in the Western Church, we have had this theology that human beings are born with an original sinful nature, and there's nothing we can do to remove that stain of sin from us, and it has to be affected by some sort of divine intervention. Well, think about it. That is really a very pessimistic view of human reality. That we are born to no good. By contrast, the people around us are emerging with a culture of optimism. And I know that's hard to see because we are facing huge problems in our world and in our society around us. We are overcoming the Great Recession. But underlying those problems, and they are acknowledged, is an understanding that somehow, some way, we human beings will be able to figure out solutions to our most vexing problems. And with this kind of underlying optimism for the future, who wants to go to a church that beats on you simply for being born a human being? And again, that's not who we are in the United Church of Christ. You listen to the sermons that are given here week in and week out, and we proclaim a hope and an optimism that is born of the human spirit being transformed and touched by God to unleash unimaginable human potential. We truly believe that. We believe and preach more hope than we do damnation and condemnation. But again, who knows that? There's a third thing that we have to deal with, and that revolves around gay marriage. 37 states now endorse gay marriage. Only 13 are left. And those who are watching politics know that it is inevitable that the other 13 will eventually make gay marriage legal. And for us in the church, the only question remains is, when will we allow gay marriage in our sanctuaries? It's not a question of if anymore, it's only a question of when. But you may say, okay, if it's inevitable, then why is it such a big issue? Well, here's the reason why. I want you to look around and tell me how many people you see in this sanctuary between the ages of 20 and 35. Richie's putting up his hand. He's grown up. Okay, not a lot. Sunday morning, do the same thing. Do a survey, just a quick survey in your head of the number of people between 20 and 35. Those people in their 20s and 30s, 75% of them cannot understand what the church has against gay people. They have grown up and come of age in a time of great diversity and great embracing. And they have no problem with it. They do not understand why an institution would categorically discriminate against a particular class of people for only one reason. And they will not set foot in a church that does. Now, I'm not castigating us, I'm not castigating them, I'm not laying out a program, but here's the mathematical reality. If only 25% of those people are open to an institution that excludes gays. And that percentage of the population will increase as newer generations come up. As we are looking at growing, we are limiting the population that we can effectively speak to. And I think it's when we as a church realize that we have to deal with this issue for our own survival that we will begin to incorporate these things into our life. But then again, the United Church of Christ. We say at the beginning of every single worship service on Sunday morning, no matter where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. Do we mean it? If we mean it, can we get it outside of our walls? And if it's not outside of our walls, whose fault is that? There's finally a last thing that those who have antipathy to church look at us with some chagrin at, and that's that they see us as a rather backwards people. How many of you have in your living rooms or your den or your TV room an old cathode ray tube hooked up to a VCR player? Not seeing the hands. Last week, I walked into a room that I hadn't walked into before in the church. There on the cart was an old cathode ray TV. It even had turn dials for the channels, and it was totally hooked up to a VCR player. My first thought was, we need to donate this to the Monroe County Historical Society. But it's true, maybe not so much true for our particular congregation in our building, but you go into so many congregations, and just looking around, it seems like you're in a time warp. It's not just what we surround ourselves with, it's also how people perceive that we think. People perceive that we are at war with a scientific age, with what we understand faith to be. And you just come along with us as Thelma and I engage on confirmation classes or our junior high school youth group. When it's time for an open question and answer period with the pastors, 90% of the questions are between faith and science. What are the stories of creation about when we're being taught about Big Bang and evolution? I can't tell you how many times I've been pushed back by our junior high on the virgin birth. They don't get it. They don't believe it. They're being taught about biology and reproduction in school, and they can put two and two together and read those stories and say, this must be about something else entirely. And they're right. And when we begin to talk about what forensic truth is about, what scientific truth is about, and the truth that is in the Bible, that is a truth that talks about meaning and the pursuit of the human heart and understanding who we are, then they begin to get it. But have we taken that dialogue outside of our walls? Do we speak with authenticity from a faith stance that respects the truth that science learns and then dialogue with it? By not doing so, we have excluded ourselves from the debates around bioethics, ethics, and medical ethics. Very important discussions in our culture right now. And we're not at the table because we are perceived as being backwards. And yet, if you look at the antecedent traditions of the United Church of Christ, we created the very idea of a universally accessible public school system. That's us. We did it. The rest of the world embraced it. We fueled the 18th century Enlightenment that created the scientific worldview. This world that we are living in is our child, and we are living in it as embarrassed parents. Why can we not get our pride and our participation and our perspectives outside of these walls? We are living in a world that is pursuing and embracing increasing diversity. But because of the media coverage and our lack of engaging our own story, we are being perceived as more and more monolithic and more as an anachronism dynamism within our culture. It is really up to us to get ourselves outside of these walls, to begin to make a visible, concrete difference in our community, and to begin to tell our story with humility, with passion, and with compassion, not boasting. Nobody needs that. Nobody needs the prideful finger pointing, I did that, see, look at me, praise me. But we should be able to get our story out. And if we don't do it, no one else will.
Let us enter into a time of intercessory prayers by saying, oh, thank you, I'm so sorry, I'm ahead of the curve. I'm so sorry, mea culpa, it's Lent. Right. saying, "We thank you, O God.
You are making all things new.
God, our provider, out of your fullness you caused life to spring up in barren landscapes. You have power to control troubled waters, making a path of safety. You hear our cries and receive our tears. You restore us to joy and laughter. You have done great things for us, O God. You are continually making